What's up guys, welcome back to Core CSS Mastery. Now is your chance to try out some of the skills you've picked up in this course so far. We're going to be doing that by creating what I refer to as a palette. If we look over on the right hand side, we see a HTML document. It's completely plain at the moment. We have different headings, we have paragraphs, we have a list, and we have two anchor tags. Now the reason why I've chosen these elements is simply because that's what we've covered in the course so far. I would also typically include other important elements such as buttons, forms, tables, anything that's going to be used at a high frequency in the site that we're building. The objective here is to use this palette as a sample style sheet that illustrates the styling that we plan on using throughout an entire page. So your job is to go away, take this HTML document, make it look good. Pretend that you're actually creating a production site and this is the theme that you're going to be using for that site. Now, before you get started, I'll give you a few tips and reminders. Firstly, remember we can make use of a color wheel to experiment with themes before we even begin writing our first line of CSS. So this is an example of a style where colors have been taken from the opposite side of the wheel. And we can actually play around with the lightness and saturation of these colors to find something that we like the look of. Once we've done that, we can then use these hex codes to formulate the basis of our styling. So let's create our first rule. We're going to style the H1 tag first of all. Let's set the color to the hex code orange, which I'm going to paste in from the color wheel we've just looked at. Another thing we might want to do here is set the text align to center. And this is one decision we will have to make, whether our headings are going to be centered, or more specifically, which ones should be centered and which ones should align to the left by default. Now remember, this doesn't have to be a final decision because when we're actually constructing an individual page, we do have the ability to change this with inline styling. So it doesn't mean our H1 always has to be in the center, but we should make a decision regarding where should it be by default so we can limit the amount of inline styling we need to do. We might think about making use of a background color as well. So here, for example, let's set a background color to one of the other colors and let's have a look at the result. Now that looks fine. It could be used as part of our styling, but let's discuss a few extra tricks. I'm going to give you some additional properties and values we haven't discussed so far in the course, just so you can do a really good job of this color palette. The first is width. And we can set a width in pixels. We'll be dealing a lot with width in the next section of the course, but for now, just know that we can also set the width of a heading. Now, a couple of things happen there. Firstly, we can see the width is now 300 pixels of that background area. But we can also see that the text align, it's still center, but it's center relative to that background area. We might not want that. So how can we shift the entire object back to the center? We can make use of the margin auto property and value. Another aspect of this current styling that I often try and avoid is square corners. Now, there's not necessarily anything wrong with square corners. Maybe you want square corners as part of your styling. I usually like to set rounded corners by default unless I have a specific reason why I want square corners. And we can do this with the border radius property. It takes a value in pixels. And the larger the value in pixels, the more pronounced the curvature effect. So you can see there's a fairly pronounced curving effect on that H1 tag. If I were to lower it to 5 pixels, you would still see it, but it looks fairly square now. Or if I were to set it to a high value, such as 30 pixels, you can see we get a very pronounced curving effect on the corners there. So for now, let's set it back to 10 pixels. Now, something else that I haven't explicitly covered so far in the course is that we can style the body element of the document itself. So remember, our entire HTML document is wrapped inside this body tag. What that allows us to do is potentially set the background color of the entire page. So let's style the body. Let's grab another one of our colors from the document. And we'll set the background color on the body to another of our colors. So that's a fairly subtle effect. I did turn the saturation down on that color quite a bit and boosted the whiteness. Let's see if we can get something a bit more extreme. So I'm going to modify that and paste in a different hex value. And we can experiment. We're not saying that our first choice is going to look great. We might not like this effect, for example, but we can experiment until we find something that we do like. Let's try, for example, something a bit more monochromatic. So it ties in with our main color, which is a type of teal color here. That could potentially work. Of course, the rest of the page still needs styling. That's down to you. A couple of other tips that can help you with this. Let's think about how we might style those paragraphs. Now, first of all, we need to set a color for the text. So let's set a fairly dark color. Simple rule here is if our background is light, our text should be dark. If our background is dark, our text should be light. Hopefully that goes without saying. So let's set the color to fairly dark color. This is not black, although it might look black. It doesn't look black. It actually gives us a dark green color here. Something else we can do here is set the background color of the paragraphs themselves. So let's set that to white. And one of the ways that we could make this look better is to use something that's known as padding. Again, we're going to cover this later on in the course. Padding, like width, is going to accept a size value. So pixel value would do fine here. So if we set the padding to 15 pixels, take a look at those paragraphs, watch what happens here. So it gives a bit of a gap between the edge of the element and the text itself. This is referred to as padding. Now remember what we said about those corners. We don't necessarily like them to be square, or at least I don't personally. So what can we do here? Well, we can apply a border radius property, and we can set it to the same as the H1, which was 10 pixels. There we go, we have a nice effect on the paragraphs. Okay, let's do one more thing, and that is to style the H3. Now notice the H3s are listed a few times in this document. Let's just style this and you'll notice where they're appearing. So to start the document, we have H1, H2, H3, H4, and then the H3s appear again just above each paragraph. In other words, they're being used as a type of subheading for the text stored in the paragraph. So this is something that you see fairly commonly. We'll have paragraphs of text, then that will be broken up by subheadings. And once again, we can style these H3s however we want to. We might want to give them a similar background color to the paragraphs as well, so we can see they're related. It's completely up to you. Try and style everything on the page, and try and make use of most of the aspects of styling we've looked at in the course so far. So to give you some reminders, make sure to choose a custom font for the headings and for the paragraphs. Make sure to configure that custom font, set a font weight, etc. Make sure to customize the list items as well. What color should they be? How much space should they have? And feel free to make use of some of the other less used components that we've discussed in this course. For example, what about something like line height? So we take our unordered list and we style the line height, set that to 10 pixels. Well, that's too close now. Definitely save space, but we probably don't want that. Let's set it to 50 pixels. See, we have a nice space there with our list. And we might decide to apply the same thing to a paragraph as well, perhaps not 50 pixels, but we don't have to take the default line spacing there for the paragraph. We could set it to something like, let's try 20 pixels, see what happens. That was a very minor effect. Let's try 30 pixels. We might like this. We might think, actually, this doesn't look very good. It looks too spaced out. It's up to you to decide. Either way, make sure to style a list. Think about which kind of bullet points or markers we want as our list, and think about the styling for the links as well. What color do we want them to turn when visited? What color do we want them to turn when they're active, when they're in focus, when they're being hovered over? Think about all of these aspects and come up with at least one, but if you want to, you could try several different style sheets here that you could actually then go on to use in a real project. All right, have fun with the color palette. Thanks very much for watching, guys.